everyone, and welcome to today's Level Up webinar. I am Michaela, joined by the lovely Marissa, and we are very excited to be continuing this series with a little bit of a twist to it this time. So we'll be having one webinar per month, designed around a different topic each time for business leaders to strategically level up their business game. And of course, we'll be talking about building the tech into your normal business operations. But to shake things up a little, we will also be bringing in guest speakers who are actual experts on the topics, have an interview with them, and get some insight to help level up your business game even more.
That's right. And we'll also publish a cheat code to our website and YouTube. It's a short how-to video designed to help your team members build their technology skills using some of the tools that we've talked about in the webinar.
So to start us off today, I just want to mention a couple of quick tools and then we'll kick it off. So these are pre-recorded conversations. However, we are here live with you in the chat box. So please feel free to chat and ask us any questions throughout so we can address all of the things that you really want to hear about. Feel free to ask them whenever you think of them, even if they're not necessarily relevant to the content that we're on at that specific moment. We're more than happy to answer them whenever. And one last thing before we officially kick it off, the webinar will be available as a recording after the fact. So you'll get a link via email early next week with the recording that you're absolutely more than welcome to share with other people inside your office or within your network that you feel would benefit from the content. So with that, let's get started.
Let's level up.
So if you have been watching us for a while, you know that we have talked about teamwork in multiple previous webinars, but today's conversation is approaching it from a few different angles than before with the help of our friends who are also experts in their fields. We'll be talking about using the technology that provides a system to help your team work well and efficiently. We'll also be talking about keeping score to know what's happening in your organization, and that way you can continue to drive that action and see results. And we will also be talking about growing people by hiring the right people and building up a very high-performing team. So as an IT partner, we get technology. So we're going to be starting there with Microsoft 365. Microsoft gets the challenges faced by your team and what helps to make them great. And Microsoft 365 actually addresses these challenges to fuel what your organization is working towards. And when it comes to organization, there are a few different apps that can help. Marissa, would you explain those for us and break those down a little bit more?
For sure. So Microsoft 365 has a couple of organization type tools. These are kind of fall into like task management and project management, which is really just a fancy way of saying that software that helps us to plan and to manage and to track resources towards a common goal. They all, in some way, are essentially helping us assign and track those specific tasks, collaborate, track documentation, and in some cases manage these smaller projects within much larger projects. When we talk about bigger complex project management, if you need to track cost dependencies or analysis, or they're more complex projects with workflows and automation, Microsoft Project is going to be the best tool for that. It is available outside of Microsoft 365 subscriptions, so it's a per user cost outside of your plan. So let me move on to the solutions that are included in Microsoft 365. Microsoft To Do is a tool that I like to say helps us get it to done. I'm probably not the only person that has said that, so there's no copyright. But
okay.
It's a personal app. It's a personal tool to help you see your tasks in a kind of a list way, and there's options to help you prioritize it based on timeline and what you need to be looking at today to help you get things to the finish line. Think Outlook tasks. That's similar what that is. It actually was bought off of Wunderlist. So just a little inside tech there. Planner is the team alternative. This is where your groups of people are going to track smaller projects and activities. This is going to look similar to Trello or another Kanban style card board, but you can have an overview and a calendar to kind of better enable your success. Task for Teams is a combination of to-do and planner in Teams. So the idea is taking all of the tasks from those two tools and putting them into one place for you to see. The last tool is Microsoft Lists, and this is not technically a task or project management tool. It's a list app, which basically means that you can share and track information. Think of it like inventory tracking tool, or maybe status reporting or workflow issues reporting. You can change statuses and manipulate the data that you see, but it's not going to offer you kind of that pre-set up task and project management tool that you might get with Planner or with Project.
You know, you talk about all these different tools, and with so many more options available, even outside of Microsoft 365, how do you know which one to choose for what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, my answer, because I love Microsoft, is use the tools that are included in a subscription you're already paying for. But the real answer, the consultant answer, is you need to start with your needs. If you have an existing tool and you have pain points, identify what those are and what the features, what you need from the tool before making a decision. All of these tools, whether it's Trello or Monday.com, Microsoft 365, the Planner versus Microsoft Project, they all have different feature sets. And so when things become really important, like building templates, let's say you want to have a repeatable process, something with automation. Once you start you identify a need like that, you're going to say, all right, these are the tools that don't fit that, so we're going to push them aside, and then you can prioritize. Another thing to think about is integration. A lot of times these tools are on their own. What's great about Planner and Microsoft To Do is that they work within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So there's no silos of information. But when you start looking at other third-party tools that may be data sources, you might need those to play. And so you're going to want to have a software, a project management or a task management software that can pull that information.
You know, as we talk about these tools, Microsoft Teams just continues to be the central tool for teams and getting things done. What can we do within the actual technology to lead our teams to success?
This is a loaded question because I feel like I could spend all day telling you all the wonderful things about Microsoft 365. It's not a secret that I really like the tool set. But the first thing I would have to say would be around this idea of organization. You want to make sure that it's being used in a way that helps the team work. So that means make sure you have everything you need right at your fingertips, and that will help you make better use of your time, get your work done, create your best work, and, limit the amount of errors that are made. When I say organization with Teams, if you've been on one of our webinars before, we've talked about its structure. The teams within Microsoft Teams are the groups of people. Make sure you have the right groups of people. Then the channels think about these as the workspaces for those people. Make sure you put those around departments or projects that are being worked on so that it makes sense to keep those people and resources together. And then it's also it's using the apps, add planner as a tab into Teams, add plan or tasks in Teams so that you can bring all of your to-dos in that central workspace. Encourage the use of those tools. Also remember that the structure of the files you're saving in those channels is really important too, because it's really easy for those to get messy. And then the second thing I would highly recommend is that you use the tool yourself to encourage others. So don't just chat in the tool, but if you post something important, share it to Outlook from Teams. And that way they get a message in their inbox that points them back to Teams. Also, send polls or forms within Teams. Show folks that there's more feature and benefit, and it should go a long way. Also, we have blogs and webinars that'll help people learn how to use the tools, because it's important for your team to build the tech skills to help them get the work done. So our website is full of that information, so you can send them that way.
Awesome. Well, I believe that is it for today. Thank you all for joining Marissa and I. And speaking of those webinars and blogs, we actually have 2 right here for you to check out. Our basic apps training and our basic teams training that will both help you to continue level up your business game. Thanks, guys.
Bye. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and over 20 years through the right mix of tools and systems, processes, and the right people, we've been able to continue to fuel our growth as a small business in really helping to guide our teams toward success. So when Michaela and I were preparing for this conversation about guiding your teams to success, we felt like it was really important and made sense for us to talk about the technology that helps teams get work done. But then we also realized that while those Microsoft 365 apps are really important to helping us get that work done, they're like the cleats. You guys are gonna have to stick with me on this analogy, but they're like the cleats that help you get a better grip and while you're on the field so that you can do what you do well. The thing though, could you imagine playing that sport with maybe the right equipment, but without the scoreboard? That's kind of this idea that keeping score is important to know whether or not we're winning or losing. If you don't know, do you just play harder? The answer is no. Yet one of the greatest challenges that businesses face is knowing what success looks like and actually tracking progress in getting there. So that's why we've invited Brent Sprinkle to talk with us today. As a small business, strategic partners are key to our success. And TrueNorth Business Navigation is one of those. I actually met Brent, I think it was back in 2012, 2013, when you were working with our leadership team on implementing this process called EOS. So as the lead guide and the owner at TrueNorth Business Navigation, you are an asset in helping us have clear vision. So I'd love for you to just give us a better idea of what EOS offers business leaders and kind of what your role is within that system.
If you don't know, stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And since most of you are likely aware of technology, an operating system is that component underneath what you do. So it provides a framework, if you will, for how to run the business. The short answer is EOS gives entrepreneurs, business leaders, leadership teams a very simple, proven approach to get whatever they want from their business. It comes from an observation, actually, of noticing that, and maybe this will resonate with you, most leaders, managers, entrepreneurs, they've got about 136 things going on in their head at any point in time. And what we realized was, to the degree that we can get you to focus on 6 things, we call the 6 key components of your business. If we can get you to focus on those 6 things, the 136 will start to fall away, because in reality, they're symptoms of not doing these 6 things well. So I'm going to take 30 seconds here and just tell you what those 6 things are, so you have a context for the scorecard component the data component that we're going to talk about today. So let me show you an example of the model here. And it's pretty simple. That's one of the foundations of EOS, is to keep it real simple. And the 6 components are: first is vision. So as an organization, everybody needs to be 100% on the same page with where you're trying to go. Sometimes leaders don't do a very good job of getting on the same page and communicating it. So that's the first component. The second is people, which, most of you might go, duh, you got to have great people to achieve your vision. But the challenge is every organization has a different definition of what great people is for their team. And we've actually got a couple tools we use to allow you to define what that is. The third component, where we're going to spend some time today, is what we call the data component. And really what we're trying to get to here is making decisions based on data rather than opinions. You may have been in rooms before where decisions are being made largely based on who's got the strongest opinion to share. So trying to get away from that. The fourth component is issues. They happen in every business, and the challenge is getting a good solve to the issue. Most of the organizations I've worked with, actually, this is their weakest component, is their ability to solve the root of what's really going on. The fifth component is process. Basically, we're just trying to make sure the most important stuff happens consistently well. So it's a very entrepreneurial approach to how to capture process, but that's what we're trying to accomplish. And then the last component is traction. Vision. In order to achieve a vision, you have to have traction, and it's really just a couple tools to help with discipline and accountability to actually go down the path of what your vision is. We like to say a vision without traction is just a hallucination. It's off on the side there. You never sort of make any progress towards it, but that's what we're trying to achieve with the traction component. So those are the 6 key components that are often at the root of those 136 issues. And my role, the role I play, is really just working with a leadership team to build strength in those 6 components. We're not trying to be experts in your business. We're just trying to teach you the handful of tools to build strength in these components. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
So I could not have said it as eloquently as you did, Brent. So thank you for that. And thank you again for joining us today. And you hit on it. The data piece is what we're going to focus on today. We kind of led into that with my really awesome analogy about sports and needing that the metrics to help you measure the success. And so with, it's something that we're working on. All companies are tracking metrics at some level or another. So this is a perfect opportunity for us to help level up. And in fact, it's something we should always be looking at to level up. So when you say that it's not when it comes to your business, they're not working. Where do you recommend that, assuming that all businesses that are working right now have some sort of metric that they're looking at, where is the first place that you recommend the people start when if they're trying to hone in on the right numbers?
Good question. There's a couple of things. One of the things I think is important for them to understand, and we try to sort of start from this perspective, is in order to get a scorecard that works for you, there's really some fundamental truths you have to believe in order for you to be able to come up with a scorecard and stay focused on a scorecard. We call it the 7 truths, but the first point here is you have to believe that what gets measured gets done. And there's a great example. Charles Schwab, before he started doing finance stuff, used to run Bethlehem Steel. And he had this very poor performing plant. And so he took his team, let's go visit the plant, see what's going on. He shows up at the plant just as one of the shifts is coming off the floor, and he asked the shift supervisor, so how many heats did you create during the shift? And the guy said 6. So Charles Schwab got out a big piece of chalk and drew a big 6 on the floor of the production there. And the next shift was coming on, and they started saying, what's that big 6 on the floor? And he says, well, that's the number of shifts, the number of heats the last shift created. So when that shift ended, they erased the 6 and put down a 7. In a matter of days, they were at 10, and in a matter of weeks, they were the lead producing plant, steel plant in Bethlehem Steel. What gets measured gets done. So that's the first thing you have to believe. You have to believe managing metrics is going to save you time. I hear, well, that number's hard to get, or, pulling those reports and, every week I got to go through this sort of mechanism. Well, you have to believe that actually seeing that data is going to save you more time than it cost you to create the data or find the data. So that's the second belief. The third, you have to believe a scorecard gives you a pulse on how the business is running, along with an ability to predict. When you can see historical data, you should be able to predict the trends that are going on and make reactions, pull levers, turn knobs to change the trend, or maybe to increase the trend, depending on whether it's going the right way or the wrong way. Number 4, you must inspect what you expect. Employees respect what a managers expect, but you have to make sure that what you think is going on is actually going on. Number 5, you often get some pushback. Managing these metrics makes people feel like we don't trust them, and quite honestly, I believe the opposite is true. Accountable people don't mind being held accountable. It actually sets clear expectations for people, which is lacking in a number of organizations. Number 6, a scorecard requires hard work and discipline and consistency to manage it, but it's worth it. You have to believe that, or you're ultimately not going to succeed in getting an effective scorecard in front of you. And the last point is, what we found is ownership. One person needs to sort of own the scorecard. They don't own all the individual data components, but somebody needs to obsess over making sure it's populated, it's effective, it's the right set of metrics, it drives action, and that you do something when the numbers aren't correct. So somebody has to feel that ownership. So there's just some fundamental beliefs that we, as a starting point, use for, if you're going to embark on trying to create a scorecard, you actually have to have some belief it's going to be useful to you. So sorry, that's a long answer to not quite answer what you asked, but just trying to set the foundation for what it takes to have a good, effective scorecard.
No, and that's quite, when I ask the question, I'm thinking that it's easy to answer, that there's this thing that we can make tracking our success easier to identify. Then I think the question obviously is just too simple, and the answer is a couple of things. And there was something that you said that really in WorkSmart, in our day-to-day, when we look at our metrics, something that has always challenged me personally is the idea of tracking the outcome versus tracking an actual task, something tangible, something that you control, which is, I think it goes down to predictive data versus reflective data. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of driving action from measurement?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can get a little closer to answering your original question along the way. Some fundamental components to a great scorecard. First, I'll tell you just how many. You kind of asked how many metrics should an organization be looking at, and from our perspective, what we try to drive is 5 to 15 metrics per team, which maybe doesn't sound like uh, uh, many to some people. But the point here is trying to get you to simplify your business down to the critical metrics. If you're trying to look at 47 metrics every week, it's really hard to know what's important and how to react. Um, if you think about your car, for instance, there's literally thousands of things that could be measured in your car that might be of interest to some people. But when you get in to take your car somewhere, there's a handful of gauges, handful of metrics that you use to ensure that that vehicle is going to deliver you to your destination. So things like speed, how much fuel you've got, what the temperature of the engine is, and maybe some directional component. But of all the things you could be measuring, there's only 4 or 5 things you look at when you get in a car. And a car is a pretty complex machine. So businesses are very complex machines. The challenge is to distill down to the few critical metrics. I mentioned weekly. We do have a strong belief that you should look at these metrics on a weekly basis. You're looking for something you can measure on a weekly basis. And as you said, we really try to push you to look at leading indicators versus trailing indicators. So while it may be interesting to know how many deals did we close last week, if you think about what it takes to get to a closed deal, before that you have to have a proposal, before that you have to have a warm lead, before that you have to have some contacts created. And it's really that leading indicator of, perhaps in this example, the number of contacts you're creating per week that will ultimately drive that closed deals metric at the end. So if you can focus on those leading indicators, because those are the knobs you can turn, the levers you can pull to change what's going on in your business. And if you can look at that stuff weekly, then you're giving yourself over the course of a quarter, you're giving yourself 12 opportunities to react and adjust. If it's a number you only see once a month, then you only get 2 opportunities during a quarter to change your path, right? It's like if you got in your car to drive and you only looked at your map once a week, in this case, the cadence needs to be quicker, right? You need to be looking at your map more frequently to make sure you don't miss a turn. Well, when you're running your business, the same thing. You got to have the opportunity to adjust the knobs and levers, the metrics that are running your business.
Well, there was also something you said earlier about driving. It was in the explanation of EOS and its components. The data was one of those components, and another one was issues and being able to solve issues. Having experienced the EOS system at work, we're very mindful about tracking those metrics so that we can use them when they aren't on track. We can use them to help identify issues. So I think that's an important part to kind of connect, is that the data isn't on a silo. It's a tool to help, like you said, make those decisions. If you're reporting them weekly, is that the owner of this kind of scorecard, this collection of metrics that reports on those, or do you assign the responsibility to individuals?
Yeah, great question. It's a great lead in for let me show you an example of what a typical scorecard would look like and what sort of the key components of a scorecard are to make them more effective. So if you take a look at this slide, the first thing is, what is the measurable? What is the metric that you're interested in? So you can see some examples here: weekly revenue, cash balance, sales calls, sales meetings, proposals, errors, utilization capacity. So this is just a sample top level set of metrics for an organization. Each of those measurables, in order to be effective, in order for them to be something you can take action on, need to have a goal associated with them. So here in the next column, you'll see each of those has a goal. So weekly revenue needs to be greater than or equal to $84,000. So if you don't have a goal and you're just looking at data, then you're just looking at data. You're not able to make a judgment on, is that good or bad? Well, we had 12 sales calls last week. Is that we celebrate, or is that, holy crap, we're not so good? So if you know the goal was 50 and you only hit 12, then that's probably an issue that needs to get put on an issues list and figure out how to solve it. The third column you see here is who. So a name that is a single name that is associated with each one of these metrics. So earlier I mentioned somebody owning the whole scorecard. When we talk about the individual metrics, measurables on the scorecard, there needs to be a single owner for each measurable. This is often driven from another aspect of EOS that involves the structure of your business. So we call it the accountability chart. It looks like an org chart, just to give you a frame of reference. But when we build this out, we talk about what are the major functional components of your business. For instance, maybe marketing, sales, operations, and finance might be the four major functional components. So in this case, you might think weekly revenue probably is owned by whoever's name is in that sales seat, right? So this is trying to put clear ownership and accountability on these metrics based on what functional responsibilities people have in the business. And only one name, because if you put two names, then suddenly it's like, oh, I thought Marissa was doing that. No, Brent was, no, who's actually, right? So you got to be crystal clear. It doesn't mean you're doing it all by yourself, but when you come to the meeting to report data, you're the one accountable for making sure that this particular metric is being hit. And then the next column, or the next 13 columns on the scorecard, is the actual data from a rolling 13-week picture. So what you get to see is not only this week's data, but what's been happening over the last 13 weeks. So now, as a leader and as a leadership team or as a department, you can see what the trends are. And if we've been trending down into the red consistently, you probably need to make an action here to avoid that. But that predictability comes from being able to see the trends. So this is just a very simple, but it's the template we use for a scorecard. 5 to 15 metrics. Each one has a goal. Each one has an owner, and you track 13 weeks of rolling history. And if you miss the goal, if you don't hit the goal, that becomes an issue for that week's meeting to talk about why didn't you hit the goal. This is not about punishing somebody. This is just an awareness that we have to hit these goals in order for the business to stay in business. And if we don't hit it, we need to solve that problem. Maybe you have a good reason for not hitting it, but whatever it is, we need to figure out why it didn't get hit so that next week we can get back to putting that number in the green.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Brent, and sharing all of your expertise. I know there is a lot more where all of that comes from, so I wanted to give you the floor to share a little bit more info if folks wanted to reach out and learn some more about some of the things that we talked about here today.
Yeah, I was just going to offer, we spoke about one of the 6 key components today. They are integrated, right? So I mentioned the structure of your business, which has to do with the people component in this. We alluded to this weekly meeting with a specific agenda, which is part of the traction component. I am happy to give a no-cost 90-minute educational discussion to any leadership team out there that wants to learn a little bit more. If you want to get a grip on your business, as we like to say, I'm happy to give you 90 minutes of my time and teach you EOS and how it works. So feel free to reach out to me through my contact information to arrange something if you'd like.
All right, so far we've covered the tools to help your employees get their work done and well and engaged in communicating with one another. And we've also talked about using metrics to keep a pulse on what's going on within the organization so that you can make data-driven decisions to do more of what's either working or less of what's not working. That is all the work part of teamwork. Now we're going to shift and talk about, I guess, the team part, and more specifically about hiring good employees to be part of a great team that you're guiding towards success. Cyndi Gave is here, the owner of the Metiss Group. She's joining to share her expertise on this particular subject. So she's worked in executive roles on HR departments, and now with the Metiss Group, which has been in business for 25 years, they advise business leaders on effective selection, employee selection, accelerating their growth and performance, and then strengthening just the organization as a whole. Today, we're going to hone in on one piece of that, the employee selection piece. But before we do, Cyndi, can you give us a little bit more information about the work that your team does? Because I wouldn't describe it as like a typical outsourced HR or even a recruiting partner for that matter.
Well, thank you, because we're neither. We are behavior experts at work, so we're all around processes around the people part of the business to give you more predictable results. I don't think I really meant that much alliteration, but it's really about how do I get the right people in the right seats? How do I accelerate their performance? How do I really allow them to perform like superstars? Because if you hired a superstar, sometimes the fact that they are not performing that way has as much to do with the environment and their leader as it does the individual. So it's really important to make sure that when we're bringing them on, we really are bringing on the superstars and not just the adequate employees. It's harder today more than usual. And if it feels as difficult as it did 18 months ago, pre-COVID, you're not imagining things. And I've got some stats that can actually convince you that it's not an imagination or a nightmare. It's every bit our reality. And I think that's a lot of why so many more entrepreneurial minded leaders are turning to us for something different. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So post and pray for the right candidate to respond is not a strategy. And what can we do differently?
All right, so folks are looking for something different because they feel, you mentioned it's not the same that it was before the pandemic. We can probably agree that nothing feels the same anymore. Can you tell us more about what's happening in the job market at this moment, and maybe a little bit about like why that's impacting the hiring strategies?
Sure. Well, the one thing that does feel similar is how tight it is. I think coming out of it, when the unemployment rate skyrocketed, everybody thought, oh, when this is over, I'm finally going to be able to hire everybody I wanted to hire, and not really. So prior to the shut off of our economy, it was like a faucet, right? So it wasn't like a normal dip in the economy and stuff like this. It was going great guns and we just turned it off. Prior to that turn off, the United States on average had over 25 months of outrageous unemployment. So 4.5% is considered the natural low. Whenever you're hiring below that, it's said that you're employing the unemployable. These are people who are just not physically, emotionally, otherwise capable of holding down full-time jobs, or they don't want full-time jobs. So we were below 4.5% for over 25 months. And the previous 3 to 4 months before the shut off, we were on average at 3.5%, which is outrageous. I can tell you Milwaukee was at about 2.6%. And I just learned last week when I was in Boise, Idaho, they were at 2.1%. Can you imagine what they're dealing with for the quality of employees? And we wonder why we can't get good food service when we go in, right? So it's kind of crazy. And so when the economy got shut off, the unemployment skyrocketed. The highest point it was at, I think, in August around 4.1-ish%. And then it started opening up and all the pundits said, oh, but it's still never going to drop right below 13% to begin with. Well, it went from 14.1 to like 12.3 from August to September, and then it dropped to 10 point something, and it just kept dropping like a rock. And somewhere around November, we were around 6.5, 6.4%, and we've been hovering around that for a while. And everybody thinks, okay, so 4.5%, 6.5%, we got a 2% cushion, right? We should still be able to get good, but who's making up that 2%? Airlines, food service, hospitality, not the people that y'all are trying to hire. So if it feels every bit as difficult as it did 18 months ago, I think that's real. But I think what also happened was when we had to cut back. Remember when it was only going to last for 2 or 3 weeks? And we were all like, oh, we could suck this up for 2 or 3 weeks. But, this is a perfect excuse to get rid of some of those people we probably should have gotten rid of a while back. So we made an excuse to get rid of them. And then, we needed to cut some more. We didn't really understand the PPP and trust that it was going to work the way it was supposed to. Thank God it did. But we, dealt with a lot of people getting cut back and cut back and cut back, and finally got cut down to the core. In some cases, you didn't just cut back the fat, you were cutting into the meat. You went down to the bone. But the people who were left with you on that island were the people you loved, right? They were the best. And you're like, this is the culture I wanted. This is why I started my own business. This is why it's supposed to be fun. And then people got smarter. They're like, nope, I'm not giving in. I am not going to be hiring the people that I hired the last time that diluted my culture, that made it difficult to work together, that just, made it that I was saying, this is not why I started my business. These are things that our clients were saying, or I don't want to do this anymore. I wanted to take my ball and go home. And it was because that their businesses had been diluted. They lost control of their culture. And that goes for every hire that they make. So I think now it's a couple of different things. When you think about the 3 areas that we focus on, which is selection, performance acceleration, and organizational health, it all starts with getting the right people in the right seat. And people are saying, I got to take my time. I know it's harder. I know it's going to take months to find the right person now, because as a society, we're just not producing enough humans. This is not going away anytime soon. So if you look at how many people there are in each, heck, even China has lifted their moratorium on you can only have 1 kid, right? So throughout the world, there is a change in we're not producing enough people, and you can only automate so much. And even if you're automating things and going towards AI, somebody's got to program that stuff. So you still have some humans involved, and I think it's getting much harder. But I think the clearer people can get about what they really need, not just what they think they want, makes a huge difference in the odds of them actually hiring the right person.
That's, you say it's the right, having the right culture. So obviously being confident in the culture that you have, and then also just finding the right person for the job. I hear 2 things from there, and actually kind of perfect into this next question. When I was looking at some of the documentation that your organization has, there's a very clear process for your selection. There's a proven process for the selection process. And it caught my attention that at the beginning, it's about defining the role, but then you move into defining the person.
Yes.
And I'm curious as to how they're different and why they're both necessary.
Sure. Before I explain that specific question, when you think about how we go about acquiring any other invested asset. So let's pretend you're only going to spend $40,000 on a new hire. If you were going to drop 40 grand on a piece of hardware or a piece of software, no one in their right mind would take $40,000 of hard cold cash, walk into Best Buy, lay it on the counter and say, hey, what can I get for this? And that's when you get talked into all that stuff that does not work when you get it back into your environment. But what you would normally do, if it's $40,000, which seems like a big investment, if it's not about a person, you would bring together anybody who is going to run that software, who would be impacted by it, who's seen what works and doesn't work before. You put them into a conference room, you lock the door and say, y'all aren't coming out until you figure out what do we have to have, what would be a nice to have, what do we just not need, right? And then you can come out. Now, the other thing is once you do that, you also realize nothing but nothing is going to match your needs exactly off the shelf. But you know what's ideal. So you can go shopping, come back to the conference room and go, okay, so these two things are close, but where are they different? And the differences, are they deal breakers, or can we create a workaround? So we just take that same logical process and apply it to the human part of the business. So it starts with getting clear, everybody on the same page. What do we absolutely have to have in the ideal person to do this job? And in that case, you need to start with, well, what exactly is the job? It's more than a job description. There's an accountability matrix that I'm sure we can, show them a little segment of. And you'll notice that there is a process that we walk people through, and it's facilitated debate. So we have all the people, all the stakeholders of the job, just as you would bring them together into that conference room for the software. And we facilitate debate over what are all the tasks and activities we want them to do. We put them into 3 to 5 accountability categories, because the average brain cannot remember more than 3 to 5 things at any given time. We all know this if we ever went to the grocery store without a shopping list, right?
All the time.
3 to 5 things, that's all I got. So we put all of those activities into 3 to 5 accountability buckets. We make sure everybody in the room agrees on it. We may move things around, and then we create priorities and identify percentage of time that a candidate can expect they'd be splitting up their time in those categories. And we create success factors. How will we know if the individual has done their job well enough to keep it? So when a candidate's looking at this, they get to see how their time's being spent, and oh yes, they will be held accountable. And is that something they're up for? Sometimes they realize, oh no, that's not what I had in mind. I know we helped put one together for a vice president of sales, and they had some pretty good salespeople on the team, but they needed to build them up a little bit more. So they really wanted somebody who could help finish building out the team, who could groom the people and mentor the people who were in place, work on some of the marketing materials and things that they were going to need. There was actually 15% of the time that this VP of sales was going to be customer facing. Well, we can work either just with our clients, with a search firm, or separately from that. And in this case, the client, because it was VP of sales, they thought they really needed to bring in a search firm who was known to work with salespeople. And the search firm kept sending rainmakers. So our senior advisors were interviewing these guys and said, hey, why are you, there's only 15% of the job that's going to be client facing. And they said, oh, no, that's not what I'm interested in. This is all about building the team, growing the team, getting the team to do the work, not putting on the Superman cape yourself and flying in and saving the day. And they said, no, that's not what One guy actually told us, I don't like people that much. I don't really want
I'm not the right candidate.
Yeah. And one of our other senior advisors asked, why do you think the recruiter sent you here? And the candidate said, oh, because did you see the accountability matrix? He said, yes, but the search firm was convinced that y'all didn't know what you were really looking for, and he knew better. The best thing is we had everybody on the executive team had agreed. They had facilitated, they were bound to determine this is what we needed. So imagine how seductive it might have sounded to have these rainmakers promise all of this stuff that they could do, but go, nope, that's not what we need. Nope. And so they could stay focused on what they really needed. Once you know what you're going to need, then you can build out the avatar to do that job within your culture. So as an example, do you think the type of person we'd be looking for to lead and groom and mentor some high potential salespeople is the same person that's an independent contributor as a rainmaker on their own? Completely different people, right? So if you didn't start with what the job needed, it could be very easy to inadvertently hire the wrong person.
All right, Cyndi, what advice do you have for selecting the right candidate?
Start, of course, with what do you really need, and then follow a process and stick to the process. Everybody goes through the process. It doesn't matter if it's the neighbor kid next door, if it's somebody's mother-in-law, if it's the grand cousin of somebody else. It doesn't matter. Everybody else has to go through the process, because even if you are convinced this person's a superstar, if you don't put them through the process, the message you're saying to everybody else in the company is, I'm not sure they could actually make it through the process, so we better shortcut it. Where if there's a superstar and you tell them, look, you need to go through the whole process, because this is going to make life a lot easier for you when you show everybody else how you blew the doors off, as opposed to them wondering if you could have done it had you gone through it. So that's really important. I know you're going to share our process with everybody. One of the things that you'll notice early on, right after the phone screen, is a core values email exercise. We recommend that our clients actually send something we give them that says basically, this exercise is really important to us because our core values are important to us. We'd like you to take some time to consider and describe how you have demonstrated each of these core values in your professional life. The average person cannot make up details on the fly. So if they can't internalize it, they start saying, well, usually I would, or generally, and you can, and you're looking for specific, because if it's somebody who can really internalize your core value and you've asked for it, and they're like, oh, this just happened last week and I can't wait to tell you, and they're typing away, right? So you also want to make sure they can get their point across in an email. As much as we trust emails and texts these days, and the words we choose only represent 7% of our communication, we can't afford for somebody to be a horrid communicator. So we put that in even before the first interview. We're finding that many of our clients will be screening out 30 to 40% of candidates. Now, again, that scares you. You're like, I don't have 30, 40% of candidates to scare away because it's tough to find them. Yeah, but you don't want somebody who can just fog a mirror. And you don't want to lose that culture again. So if you're really serious about it, that's one of the key steps. One of the other steps, the order of our process is important. After the first interview, that's when you do assessments to make sure it matches the avatar. And you'll notice we use more than one science. Most folks who use assessments will only use one science, and that's typically behavioral. Is it an introvert or an extrovert? Is it an analytic or a creative? We use behavior-based. We also use workplace motivators, which helps us understand the culture. We use personal skills, helps us understand their soft skill toolbox. And the third piece is fourth piece is the critical thinking test. So we know how fast the hamster is turning up here. So if you think of the other three pieces as how many lanes on the expressway are open, and the critical thinking tells you the speed limit, you get a pretty well-rounded view of what this person is like. So you give somebody the assessment after you've gone through the first interview, where you've used behavior-based interviews that behavior-based interview questions that tie to those characteristics you and your superstar team thought were critical for this job. Then you follow up with reference checks where you're exploring the gaps. Remember, there's always going to be gaps when you're using 4 sciences. There's always going to be gaps between what you originally set out to find and what you find. What you're trying to figure out is, can I live with this? And good interviewers will try to figure out how the candidate's going to work well in the organization. Great interviewers will try to figure out what could be this person's Achilles heel and can we live with it? That's really a great interviewer, because you got to go in eyes wide open. Nobody's perfect. If somebody comes up to you and says, oh, you got to meet this person, they walk on water, send them back, go find a fault, because one of us is going to be disappointed. So that multiple science thing and then doing the reference checks really sets up the hiring team when they're going into the next round of interviews to be laser focused on those areas of gaps so they can decide, can I live with this or not? And so really following that process, which then leads into the onboarding, is really critical.
Now, you said that you and your team thought. So obviously the decision to hire and going through the process of defining who the person, the job activities and the person itself, it's a team activity you recommend?
Yes, we usually recommend that you bring together, just like when we were talking about that software, you bring together the people who understand what it takes to do this job well, or who might be impacted if the job is done poorly. People who are going to be on the team with this person. So, it's not unusual when we're dealing with a sales role that somebody from operations is in there because they have to create whatever the salesperson sells, that the finance people are in there because they always want to have a say on what the salespeople are being held accountable for. Maybe some people report to the sales folks. And that's because we're getting a well-rounded view. The supervisor may only see certain aspects of it. Because, and we have to remember that nobody really works in a vacuum anymore. My first job out of college was running a temporary service, and I remember getting the call saying, hey, I need somebody who can crunch code, and don't worry about personality. We're going to put them in a closet and just let them crunch code. We don't get that anymore, right? Your software people have to deal with the end users and not be patronizing and not be degrading and demeaning. They have to be very good at extracting information and teaching. So we don't have the luxury of hiring jerks anymore. Well, not that we ever did, but it's worse. So it takes more of an effort. But we also have to remember that people then are working with other team members internally and externally. And I can't help but think about, and I apologize for people who don't like sports analogies, but I'm a sports fiend. And so a few years back when the Golden State Warriors were winning all of those teams, and they had Steph Curry and Draymond Green, and they had Thompson on the team, and the number of assists that those guys had when they were on their winning streaks were more in one game than their competitors had in the entire round. That's how selfless they were when they were playing. But now, as awesome as LeBron James is, if we took LeBron James in and dropped him into that Golden State team, I'm not sure they would have been as successful because it didn't match the rest of the team. It would have clashed. It would have created... You guys know what it's like when you get somebody on your team that can do the job, but you're like, man, they just don't fit. And it's hard. And that has to be built into that avatar. That's why behaviors alone aren't enough. I've never seen a team have a problem because one person's an extrovert and another person's an introvert. Usually it's because their motivators aren't well aligned.
Well, Cyndi, thank you so much for joining us today for our Level Up webinar and sharing all of your expertise with us. We will be sure and throw your website in the chat box, so if anyone wants to check that out, it will be there. And don't forget, there are also ebooks and white papers available for more information on everything that Cyndi talked about here today. We appreciate you, Cyndi, and thanks again.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here.
Thank you, Cyndi. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and that you got a lot of good information out of it. If you have any last minute questions, feel free to send them in the chat now and we will answer them for you. You can also contact either Marissa or myself at our emails listed here on the screen. We're always looking for suggestions and topic ideas that you all want to hear about, so feel free to send us any feedback. Be sure and stay tuned for the cheat code coming out soon, which you will be able to watch on our blog or on our social media pages. We also will have the registration details coming out soon for our upcoming webinar, so stay tuned for all of that as well. And with that being said, thank you all again for hanging out with us today, and see you next time.
See ya.